Welcome to The Bigger Game, where we talk about what really matters in living with purpose. I'm your host, Abiza Rashid. Let's dive into bold conversation, life experiences, and go from stuck to unstoppable. Welcome to this edition of The Bigger Game. Here today with Joe Caruso from Caruso Leadership, advisor to CEOs and leaders, and author of your latest book, Narrative Wins. I think this is a long series of wins, if I can use that pun for a second, for you. I just wanted to celebrate Narrative Wins for a second, and I think it's a bestseller already, so I want to acknowledge that as well. Welcome to the show, Joe. How are you?
Thanks. How you doing, Beezer?
Hey, living the dream, man. I got Joe Caruso on the line. What more do I want? Oh, it's been a pleasure to know you all these years, and and just catching up with you again is the pleasure is all mine. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you. Nice intro. I liked your intro. Thank you. The Bigger Game.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, that was done by Leduc Entertainment. Might as well give them a plug while Leduc Entertainment helped me put it them. So, Joe, the bigger game, when you hear the word bigger game, what does that mean to you?
I think that there might be a different perspective on life. I think that if I can use life as the context, or game as the context for life, I would think that it would refer to, or at least I infer that it's further perspective, a pullback, if you will, from the moment that is.
Say more about that.
It's just my interpretation of
that the moment that is versus pulling back. That's an interesting distinction.
I think many people live a transactional life. I think they see a series of transactions during their day, and some of us try to pull back from that and say, okay, well, who am I now? We enter each age of life as a novice, I say in my book, and I've never been this person before. I've had this collection of my interpretation of these experiences. They're just an interpretation, or as I say, a narrative, a personal narrative. So I think that it's important for us in life to pull back a little bit, pull focus, as a director might say, and take a look at the whole mise-en-scene around us, see how we identify it, the assumptions we make, ask ourselves the question I talk about in the book: what else could this mean? What else could I mean in this process with this other?
Yeah, I think that leads, but yeah, I think that leads right to your book, right? That the narrative, the personal narrative, the collective narrative, and how that plays into context. Maybe you can speak to that for a second.
Sure. We are the stories we tell ourselves we are. And these stories form and collect a collective narrative, a singular narrative around the story of our life. Just like a movie can have many stories in it. But if somebody said, what's the movie about? You would be speaking about that narrative arc in that makes the subject of the movie itself. In our minds, we're the stars of our own movie. And our mind constructs our lives that way. And we could say, no, it's our children first. Well, you have to, in your mind, consider that thought as yours first. And then how you construct your version of yourself. And that process happens invisibly behind the scenes, wherever you think your mind may be. Most people think it's behind our eyes somewhere, where our brain is located. But we know that the mind is doesn't occupy a physical space. It's more of a process. And so it's very important for us to be able to pull back and look at the stories we tell ourselves we are. Some of them are true and some of them are not. but we will construct a reality that will support them as a great truth because it's our truth. It's who we are, and it's how we define ourselves. And in life, when we really go through a transformational period, it's because we've reconsidered our own version of ourselves, not just what's something outside in the external, or what I call the secondary world might mean, but how it means, how and what it means in the context of me. So, for example, a deer could be Bambi. I love animals. A deer can be venison if you're a hunter or a chef. A deer can be a pest if you're a gardener. It's still a deer. But everything is seen in the context of how you see yourself. And so to truly have a transformational idea, that original context has to shift a little bit from that nucleus center of gravity by which all ideas satellite around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if I were to take that one step further, I'd even pull it back to choice. All of that, whether I recognize it or not, is really my choice. Right? I think that, and like you said, transformation. When I finally choose to transform, I just made a different choice about what that narrative is. So the sense of like personal accountability and I think empathy is a big part of your book, reaching into somebody else's story or their narrative to understand what their version is, so that you can actually relate to them from that perspective. You know, I think your book goes deeply into that. I think that's a huge concept right there.
Very much so. While our own personal narrative, we don't see it as a choice. We see us as who we are. We had this mother and father, and we have these children, and we have this job, and we have this career, and we've had this past, and I have this bad elbow. I don't have a bad elbow, but I'm making things up now. And this is a construct of understanding of self. And it's very difficult to just choose to deny something that's been real in your life and grab onto something foreign and say, now this is me. So beyond choice, there has to be an understanding and acceptance of a consideration, a new consideration in a new contextualization. That's why we talk about in the book, context is everything. How we contextualize can change the specific meaning of something. Like I just used the example of the deer. So while, and your second point, understanding others, we get into that in the book very deeply, because if we are truly fully and empathically in the moment with another, that means we're trying to understand how they see themselves more than how we lock them into our version of them. And we can start to understand how to see the world through. Now, we can't see the world through the side of their eyes that they look through. They're the only ones in the world that can do that, with all the context and history and the story of self that they have. But we can understand when they say, this is a belief that I have, this is a fact that I know. Like when I interview CEOs, this is what this company is. And then I interview other leaders and I find out there may be other versions and other colorizations and other gradations of that emphatic singularity. And to be fully and empathically in the moment with the other is to be curious. And the key to all of this is to be curious. I introduce a word in the book, a new word to many people, perspicacity. That's not just to be aware of what happens, but to be aware of why it's happening, to have a true understanding of different meanings that it could also have, besides the one you might immediately viscerally attach to it based on your experience or your knowledge in the moment. And this, so to be aware of ourselves is very important. To be perspicacious and curious. Why do I think this? Why do I always think this? Why don't I like this? Why won't I even consider this idea? These are very good considerations to have as we consider what you might call the bigger game.
The context comes right back to that, right? So I get
Sure.
based on those considerations, I think what you're saying is that I can choose my I have more of an ability to choose my context if I base it on some of the things you just talked about a minute ago. That's my access to choosing powerfully, I think, is where you're pointing.
Yes, when I was diagnosed with incurable cancer, I'm cured now. I don't want to create a suspensive podcast for you here. Have your subscribers figure out whether or not I'm going to make it to the end. I'm fine, but I'm one of the first cured of testicular cancer. When I had it, it wasn't curable. So the context that I had was, oh my gosh, I have an incurable disease. I should focus on death. And I had a nurse explain to me that I could be the first one cured. We don't know, but I'm going to live until I die. Do I really want to focus on my funeral in the meantime? And I thought about that. And that shift in context didn't change, Abizer. It didn't change that I had an incurable cancer. It didn't change that fact. It changed what that fact meant. And that's what context can do. It's that lever that can mechanically shift what something means.
I remember reading that in your book.
That's in the very beginning of my last bestseller, The Power of Losing Control. And I mention it also in Narrative Wins. Interesting, two best-selling books. I haven't been able to say that for more than a week or two here. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you on so early in this journey of yours with Narrative Wins, and I am still in the midst of it, as I mentioned to you a minute ago,
Cool.
offline before we got online, and I'm already enthralled by what I've read so far. I wish I had more hours in the day. I could just read more of it before we got on this podcast. Maybe you're gonna speak about that. I think there's, I could do it, but I think coming from you, I think it has a lot more weight. You talk about these three choices you made in that moment you talked about. You had cancer, you had this, experimental treatment you were going to take on at 18 years old, the time alone. And as you pondered all of this, you came up with 2 or 3 nuggets for yourself that I think I guess I would ask the question today. I think they may have been a big part of forming your own narrative, your own personal narrative.
Oh, sure. Yes, right? Absolutely.
About how you've lived with your life, the overarching art that you talked about. I wonder if you can speak to those.
I'm having a little trouble with the video and audio here. I apologize. Can you repeat that question again for me?
Is it kind of flaking it out? I said, I could read it. I could paraphrase it out of the book for us on this podcast, but I think now that I've got the source right in front of us, I'd love to hear it from, you're talking about being 18, a lot of the time spent by yourself as you get the diagnosis and going through this sense of chemo. One of them was about, study 4 hours a day and then, live where you focus on life versus death. There are some things you mentioned in the book. I wonder, now that we have the source right in front of us, I'd love to hear it from you directly, your sense of all that. And I think, did that actually form your personal narrative? I guess that'd be a question as well.
It had to, necessarily. I mean, you're 18 years old, you have your life in front of you. You don't consider dying before your parents do. You don't consider, one of my favorite quotes from a philosopher is, I'll paraphrase it, is that life is worth living is at once the greatest of all assumptions and the most necessary. And so at 18 years old, why live if you're going to die? Becomes a major question, especially for a mind like mine. And so you're left with a lot of time to think about that while you're sick from the chemotherapy or recovering from surgeries, or, there's a lot of time. And you're sick and you're going through all of that. And one of the things I considered was I want to develop myself to the best of my abilities, to help other people and to find out who I can be and enjoy it. I added those 3 words a couple of years later after I was diagnosed as, well, not cured at the time. They couldn't use the word, but it was enough time had passed. And testicular cancer is a fast-growing cancer. That's why it was one of the first curable cancers. So the time had passed that I probably wouldn't get it again, and it wasn't going to return. So now what? And the reason I include others is I'm not alone in this world. So the purpose of life I thought out in my little teenage brain was, it must have to do something with others, and it can't be to mess with others or to hurt others or to take advantage of others. There must be something that I can do in this gift of unique life that I have to augment the lives of others. And that's one of the things that I key in on with all of my CEO clients is I want them to be the best version of themselves they're capable of, which is beyond their imagination, or maybe within the scope of their imagination, but the distance between who they are and how to get there seems perhaps murky. How do you stay who you are and become somebody better? That's a big question, and that requires that shift in context, which often requires conversations just like this one that we're having.
It requires a coach like Joe Caruso. That's excellent. Yeah, so you all talk about Muhammad Ali and kind of that's a funny little story, but it has a lot of merit, I think. There's so many nuggets to take away from that exchange between Shavers and Muhammad Ali, right? There's a huge
from the beginning of the book. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was
Speak
great.
to that
was
for a
great
minute.
Story. Can I tell that story?
Please.
Okay. So I'm in Vegas, and my buddy wants to go see Caesar's Palace, and because he was there a lot as a younger man, and that's when they used to have all the boxing events back in would that be the 70s or the 80s? I don't know. I'm not a fan. But we'll go over there, and right outside of the arena is a very large man sitting at a table with color photos in front of him. And there was no one in front of him. So I just approached him and I said, "Hi, my name's Joe Caruso." And I could tell by the documents in front of him and the photographs. This man's name was Ernie Shavers, and he's one of the few people ever rang Muhammad Ali's bell, if you will. And to the point where the ref had to put them in their separate corners for a minute. And this is only the second round. And so Ernie Shavers grabs my hand. My hand disappeared in his, Abizer. Just disappeared. And he stood up, and I looked up at this. I'm 5'5". I'm a little guy. And I looked up at him, and he said, "Very nice to meet you." And I said, "I have some questions for you. They're not about boxing as much, but it is about this match." And he said, "I'll do the best I can." I said, "Well, you're about to fight one of the most famous athletes in the world. Literally world renowned boxing heavyweight champion. And you get into the ring and they introduce you first. What was your thought going through your head when you got into the ring?" And he says, "Well, the first thing I did is I looked at the front row, and those were all of the people that supported me to get there." He says, "And I thought I didn't want to let them down." And I thought, well, that was an interesting thought. And then I said, "So then you hit him in the second round." And Muhammad Ali's quote, by the way, which I didn't learn until later, was, "He hit me so hard, my family in Africa hurt." And he had a great sense of humor. And I said, what did you think as you were going back to your corner after you knocked him like that? And he said, oh, I got him. I've got a lot more rounds to go. If I land one more of these, and supposedly he had one of the toughest punches, I think he was left-handed, on record. And he says, I land one more of these, the title's mine. I said, that's interesting. I said, I do have one more question, because I remember Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali in his heyday, you know, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. He was a talker and quite poetic. But he talked all the time. He was a great guest on talk show hosts, you know, for talk show hosts. And I said, so when you came back and you're toe to toe in the ring after you hit him that hard, and he knows it, what did he say to you? He had to say something. And Ernie Shavers says, I'll never forget it. He said, not tonight. And I put that in narrative wins, because even in such a brutal sport as boxing, Muhammad Ali is using the mind. And he's saying, okay, this guy's reality is he hit me. He knows he hit me hard. He knows he shook me to the core. I can't deny that. But what I can do is contextualize it for him. And he contextualized it by saying, in another fight, you might beat me. You might have a bigger punch than I have. You might take the title. Not tonight. And those many decades later, that narrative rang true in Minister Ernie Shavers' mind. Not tonight. He said, I'll never forget it. 2 words. So a narrative can be distilled down into words. A personal narrative can be distilled down into a meaning that's easily understood and concise. And that's what we work on with people's understanding yourselves. I don't want to write who I am on the head of a pin. I've never understood that. I understand it's poetic in some way. I want to understand it in such a micro format that no matter where I look, I see that. I understand who I am at any point in time as I enter each age of my life as a novice, and how I can bring my best to that situation with the other or the others. I think about that before every keynote speech I deliver. I think of that before a podcast.
I think, it's a difference. And if I were to use my language for it, I would say it's like personal ownership, like knowing who I am. Because I think if I walk into a conversation or a situation, I'm not clear on who I am, it's hard for me to do what Muhammad Ali did or whatever, you know, that whole sense of setting the context up. Because even I don't know where I'm coming from in the first place. So how do I adjust something, or how do I modify something or create a new context if I don't have a sense of where I'm at already? It's like trying to get from, you know, Detroit to California and thinking I'm coming from Florida, right? It's not really quite
Can't get there.
possible.
No map will help you.
Right. So I think that's essential. Are there any other points in the book that you think, you know, considering our conversation here, that you think you want to bring to light, or any other points in general that you'd want to leave our audience with?
I think it's very important to turn that curiosity inward, and that we understand that we're a version of ourselves at any point in time. And the story we tell ourselves can be questioned. And the conclusions we come with aren't written in stone. We are developing mind, we are developing body. The atoms in our body replace themselves at different levels, at different times, and different stages. And our mind, I'm not the same person I was when I was 24 years old. I'm not the same person I was yesterday. And I can wake up in the morning, and instead of looking at my list of things to do, which I made yesterday, where I can think, what's the most important thing I can do today to make the change that I want to change in my life the most? And do that first. Do that first. Everything else will wait.
Context. Context is decisive. Yeah, that's excellent. All right. That's a very powerful last thought. One last opportunity to sum this up. And anything else you want to say before we conclude here?
Well, I want to thank you. Thanks for doing the podcast, and thanks for sharing this and giving me the chance to share these thoughts and this 10 years of work I put into Narrative Wins with your audience. I really appreciate you and the work. You feel a sense of responsibility to others. I know that's how you feel. And you took the time to construct this and create the bigger game. And thanks for letting me be a part of it. That's very important to acknowledge. Thanks.
Very, very kind of you, Joe. You know, if people want to learn more about Narrative Wins or more about Joe Caruso and your Caruso leadership and the services you provide, how can they reach you? How can they contact you?
Sure. They can go on narrativewins.com. My website is carusoleadership.com. I try to give away as much information and podcasts and interviews and thoughts as I possibly can right there on the site. And they can also reach the offices through there for speeches or working with leadership teams, retreats, and so on.
Excellent. Yeah, what would it like to have Joe Caruso as your keynote speaker? I can only imagine. Thanks, Joe. Joe, I appreciate your time. It's been a wonderful few minutes with you, and I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for listening to The Bigger Game. If you're ready to lead with intention and create the life you want, follow along at abuzerrashid.com and on social media at AbuzerRashid Group. Until next time, keep playing bigger.